Hello BookTube and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm coming to you with my October 2016 TBR. So let's jump into and start off with my challenges because I do have a bunch of stuff to talk about in this video. So according to Goodreads, I am one book ahead of schedule for my A to Z author challenge. I'm now at 19 out of 26 books completed. For my A to Z title challenge, nothing has changed. I'm still at 20 out of 26 books. For my 2016 How Many Pages Challenge, I am now at 24,261 pages finished out of 25,000 pages, which puts me at 97% of my goals. So I am going to surpass it this year, which is very exciting. The Jelly Belly Jelly Bean Challenge, no flavors yet completed. And for the Listopia Challenge, I'm still on level 1, 22 out of 25 books read. So my stats for October, I read a grand total of 7 books, 1 2-star book, 2 3-star books, 3 4-star books, and 1 5-star book. And I read 3 nonfiction, 1 mystery thriller, 2 romance, and 1 historical novel. I've also decided to add this in going forward because I think it's kind of fun, is the dates that the books were written. I read 5 books that were published between 2011 and 2016, and I'm going off original publication date for this. I read 1 book published between 2001 and 2010, and 1 book published between 1981 and 1990. 6 ebooks and a single audiobook. Page count for the month, 2,197 pages, which is about 70 pages a day, not too shabby. So, got through that rather quickly. This is the second time recording this. I have no brain power this morning, and for the entire first part of the video that I shot just before, the cat was chewing on our Christmas tree. Yes, the Christmas tree is up. We're not actually decorating it until like next Saturday. The 20th of November is the Toronto Santa Claus Parade, and that's the weekend we generally decorate the Christmas tree. But my husband's letting it air out. It's a fake tree, and it's been kind of shoved into a bag for the whole year. Anyway, that's got nothing to do with anything. Let's jump into the books that I read this month. So, as usual, I go from my least favorite to my most favorite. So we will start off with Lizzie by Evan Hunter. This book was originally written in 1984, and it was republished for ebook with a new cover in September or October of this year, excuse me. And this is essentially the trial of Lizzie Borden. This is the second Lizzie Borden book that I have read this year. The first one was The Secrets of Lizzie Borden by Brandy Purdy, which I believe I read back in May. I enjoyed that one far more than this one. The author's reasoning behind the murders was that Lizzie Borden was a lesbian and she killed her parents so they wouldn't find out. That's a far stretch for me as far as I'm concerned. I think it was more if she did it because she was arrested and put on trial but was acquitted, that it was more for money than anything else. But, you know, this is this author's take on it. And the novel was fiction and nonfiction. I categorized it as fiction because once you start adding a fictionalized element into a nonfiction book, in my opinion, it immediately becomes fiction. You know, you can't take your own spin on something and still call it nonfiction. So the book was written back and forth, and like the first chapter, it really delved into her trip to Europe. That she took, I think, a year before the murders, and how she met this woman, and they had a relationship, and I mean, that's all fine and dandy if that's what actually happened. I don't know. Again, I believe this is the author's take on it. The opposite chapter, so every other chapter, it was the trial, and it was actual transcripts from the trial, so that part of it was nonfiction, that you were essentially reading exactly what was being spoken back and forth during the trial and the questions being asked. And it was extremely boring, I'm sorry to say. I am a huge fan of Law & Order. I love that program, and I do really enjoy watching the trial portions of it. But this really reminded me that what I see on television is not real. I mean, it's real to an extent, but you're only seeing bits and pieces of the trial. The parts in this book that went on about the trial were so tedious and boring because literally he just kept asking her the same question over and over again, with just a slightly different take on it to see if he could trip her up to giving a different answer, and it becomes very tedious. And even in the book, Lizzie herself says, like, you know, I don't know anymore what you're asking me because you're asking me so many different things. So it was a little interesting, but it was rather boring, to be honest. The nonfiction parts between weren't so bad. And then at the very end, the author kind of gives his reasoning and all this. It wasn't my favorite book. This is only the second book, like I said, that I've read about Lizzie Borden. But I would absolutely recommend The Secrets of Lizzie Borden over this one. Both are nonfiction, or both are fictionalized works, but I think the other one was a far more interesting read. Next up is a book called Campfire Stories of Western Canada by Barbara Smith. I gave this book 3 stars. This was essentially a really cute book of little ghost stories. It was a super quick read. It was a lot of fun. You know, these weren't necessarily true stories. It was like a friend of a friend kind of thing. But if you've got, you know, maybe younger teenagers, or you yourself are a fan of ghost stories, this might be a fun book to pick up and take camping, you know, to read around the campfire. I didn't dislike it. I didn't love it. It was enjoyable, and it was kind of nice reading about different parts of Canada. But again, these are the kind of stories that, you know, it could say that it's set in Grand Prairie, Alberta, but you could very, very easily move that to Boulder, Colorado, and, you know, the story would still read exactly the same. It really had nothing to do with the location. It was the story itself. So, and there were a bunch of them, I think, like at least 30 or something. But like I said, really super quick read. I really enjoyed it. Next up, Haunted Bridges, Over 300 of America's Creepiest Crossings by Rich Newman. I also gave this book 3 stars. Again, this was like 300 stories of different bridges in the United States. And if you are into ghost hunting or anything like that, this will be a really fun book to pick up, because you could kind of go through and see if there's any in your area. The book was laid out in different chapters based on the nature of the haunting, whether the bridge was a suicide bridge, or people were hung on it, or what have you. And then within each chapter, it was laid out by state in alphabetical order. So you could kind of flip through and find, you know, maybe stuff in your area. It was a little creepy. Some of the stories were a little bit more creepy than others. A lot of them were monotonous. You know, one hanging is the same as other hangings for other reasons, you know, but still, it was really interesting. Local legends, local history. If you're into that kind of thing, you might like this book as well. I actually really did enjoy it. And next up, Something Wicked by Evelyn Vaughn. I gave this book 4 stars. This was a silhouette bombshell novel. This was a reread for me, and I really, really liked it. I think the first time around I read it, I might have given it 5 stars, but now I've dropped it down to 4. You know, your reading taste changes as you get older. And I still really enjoyed the story. It was about a woman named Kate, who is from a family of witches, and her sister Diana is killed, brutally murdered, like at the very beginning of the book. And she walks in essentially on the murder, and he tries to kill her, and she, who has not been practicing, you know, she was taught a few things as a child but stopped practicing, she curses him, and pretty brutally, and uses his name and all that stuff. Well then, because he told her his name and he didn't kill her, he is now arrested and brought in, and then after the fact she finds out that he actually has a twin brother. And she cursed the wrong brother, and because she cursed him, she is also now tied to him. So it was really, really interesting trying to find, you know, what happened and why. You know, besides the supernatural element of it, it was a really, really great story, like a murder mystery. It is an older book, and because it's a silhouette bombshell, these books, for those of you who don't know this, the Harlequin and Silhouette books, back when they still had the Silhouette imprint, they were literally brought out for a month. And, you know, at the end of the month, all the ones from, you know, October were taken off the bookshelves, and are replaced by, you know, November's books for physical copies. Sometimes you can find stuff like online, or in used bookstores. You can often find a lot of these for a relatively inexpensive price. But if you're looking for specific books, I highly recommend checking online or getting it as an ebook. It was not available for the Kindle. I had to get it off of harlequin.com. So if you're interested in reading it, I really did enjoy it. And yeah, it was fun. Next up, American Murder Houses, a coast-to-coast tour of the most notorious houses of homicide by Steve Leto. This was narrated by Barry Press. This was my audiobook for the month. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed this book. This morbid curiosity part of my brain loved this. It went in chronological order for murder houses that are still standing. And it tells you the very beginning of the chapter, there's a different house per chapter. They tell you exactly what happened with the murder. This is the short synopsis, this is what happened. And then it backtracks and it tells you the events leading up to and the events afterward, oftentimes if there was a trial or, where the killer might be now if he's still alive. It was really interesting. A lot of the houses were famous houses as well, and not just for the murders necessarily. Well, perhaps some of them. The Lizzie Borden house was mentioned. The the O.J. Simpson trial, the O.J. Simpson murder, that house. The Menendez brothers, who were charged with killing their parents. A couple serial killers, the Manson murders were mentioned in here. It was really, really interesting. It wasn't overly creepy. The Amityville Horror House was mentioned. If you're into history and stuff like that, definitely check it out. And what I love also is at the end of each chapter, they told you whether the house is privately owned or whether you can actually go there, and oftentimes how much it's sold for, and the exact location down to the zip code and street number and all that stuff. So highly enjoyable, and I'm really, really glad I read it. Next up, Heart of Evil by Heather Graham. This is the second book in the Crew of Hunters series. I also gave this book 4 stars. I love my Heather Graham, and I love the Crew of Hunters series. This is the first book I read this month, in October, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It also took place in New Orleans, same as the first book, and in this case, it's another one of the original detectives from the first book, and this is his story. And it deals with an ex-girlfriend, and her family has a murder that takes place on the property. What I really like about these books is that you also get the murderer's perspective. You don't know who he is, but at the beginning of certain chapters, you'll get this part in italics. That's him talking or him doing whatever he's doing. And that happens throughout the book, and it's highly exciting and interesting because it's a completely different take on your standard murder mystery. Ghosts are involved very, very heavily in this book, and I do find the characters relied a lot on the ghosts helping them, which is fine. But yeah, still really interesting. If you're into that kind of thing, it takes place in one of the old antebellum mansions, and it's got a lot of New Orleans history in it, and again, it's a Heather Graham novel. You can't go wrong. And my favorite book of the month, which kind of came as a total surprise when I was looking at all the books I read this month, that this one was my favorite, because it was the book I added in at the last minute because I wanted another Halloween book, and I wanted a Halloween Harlequin novel. And this one literally just came out in October. It's called Her Halloween Treat by Tiffany Rez. It is the first book in the Men at Work series, and I gave it 5 stars. This book was wonderful. It was not your typical spooky ghost story, Halloween story. It took place in the Halloween season in late October. Pretty much the story is about a woman named Jolene, who is she goes by Joey, who has been dating this guy for a couple years and then finds out he's married and to someone else. And she pretty much takes off to her family's remote cabin in Oregon to kind of, lick her wounds and, well, her friend is urging her that the best way to get over a guy is to get with another guy. And she thinks it's just I'm not ready for that right now. Well, then, of course, she meets the caretaker, whose name I cannot remember, but they were absolutely adorable together. The back and forth talking narration between the two characters and between all the characters in the book was fantastic. If you are a fan of the Gilmore Girls and that back and forth very quick banter that they have on that show, that's what it reminded me of. It was great. It was very, very, very steamy. I'm going to say that. There was a lot of adult situations in this book. There was a lot of adult language in this book. But it didn't take anything away from me. I mean, that doesn't bother me to begin with. But sometimes when I find an author relies a little bit too much on that, it takes away from the story. This was not the case in this situation. It ended off with her brother, who is gay, and his Halloween wedding that he was having. And it was just a fantastic, fantastic story. I enjoyed it so much that if you watched my November TBR that I just posted, I am reading the second book in this series in November because I just want to continue on. I love this author, and I will now be picking up a lot more of her work. So anyway, guys, that's all the books that I read this month. Let me know in the comments below, are any of these books interesting to you, or have you read any of these books yourself and let me know what you thought about them. Until my next video, guys, take care and happy reading. Bye.